Hey, my name's Sean. I'm an Enneagram teacher and a psychotherapist, and today we're talking all about Type 5 on the Enneagram. Type 5 goes by a couple of different names. They're often called the Observer, the Investigator, or the Thinker. Type 5s are highly analytical people who have a huge capacity for knowledge. Often Type 5s will specialize in one particular area and know basically everything there is to know about that particular thing. Type 5s are very logical, rational people who approach life and its problems in a very objective manner. However, Type 5s can have a lot of difficulty getting in touch with and expressing their emotions, and they can create a lot of confusion and push people away in relationships because of the way that they have a very detached demeanor and set very strong boundaries with people. Beginning with the origins of this type, the basic unconscious belief for Type 5 is that the world demands too much and gives too little. Many Type 5s talk about growing up in an environment where they really felt intruded upon. This can, for example, be the result of an overbearing parent, someone that was very needy and kind of wanted a lot to do with them to micromanage their life. Another example can be growing up in a really busy household where they might not have actually had time and space themselves because they were living, for example, in a room with 3 other siblings. Another thing that can happen for Type 5s is they just experience a lot of neglect early on. And so this can just mean that in relationship they don't get a lot of love and attention, or perhaps they're just missing out on some more basic things like food and clothing and money. And so therefore the internalized message here is that there's not enough to go around. So I really need to hold on to what I've got and be very careful about what I give away to people, because I could end up being drained of what I've got. And this can particularly be true for relationships for Type 5. Type 5s mostly find human engagement and relationships with other people to be draining, at least to some degree. And so they're very careful about the ways in which they engage with people and who they engage with, and instead find a sense of richness and enjoyment through knowledge, through reading and learning about things, and that to them is a sense of nourishment. Type 5s can be found in the head center of the Enneagram, where the core emotion is anxiety. Unlike Type 6s and 7, Type 5s spend the most time in their head, in the sense they're often stuck deep in thought, ruminating about some particular topic. I've heard many 5s talk about the fact that they're not really thinking about something that's actually that interesting to other people, but it's very interesting to them. And this in some way serves as a distraction from the present moment and, more importantly, the anxiety that they're feeling. My understanding of this anxiety is it's about an existential threat, in the sense that we return to this idea of the unconscious belief for Type 5s, that the world demands too much and gives too little. Type 5s kind of feel on some level that they're going to reach a point one day that they'll be completely annihilated, in the sense that all of the resources they have will be depleted, and the result of that is just obliteration. And so they do a lot of things in their life to try to buttress against this, to make sure that this isn't going to happen. One of the ways that they do this, for example, is to very carefully manage their time and resources and the boundaries that they have. Type 5s have incredibly strong boundaries, and it can often be not one boundary, but many boundaries. They're making sure that they don't run into that person at work who's going to waste a lot of their time, or they make sure that they're not going to spend money on frivolous things that don't make any sense. They're very economical and efficient with their resources. Another thing that Type 5s do is become very knowledgeable about things. Type 5s like to be competent. Being competent is a sense of preparedness for them. So when something does go wrong, they'll be smart enough and have enough knowledge about that thing to know what to do about it. So they'll often spend time researching things and making sure they really have enough knowledge, because for them that is a resource. That is something they can do and control in a situation that might otherwise feel like it's outside of their control. The passion for Type 5 is called avarice. This isn't really a word that we use much anymore, and so sometimes the word greed is used. But this kind of has a connotation that Type 5s are like Scrooge McDuck, like they just want to hoard a bunch of money or something, and that's not how Type 5s work. Avarice in this context refers to a hoarding of resources to protect against future impoverishment. And so Type 5s will hold on to resources to make sure that they're not depleted, but the kind of resources they hold on to can differ from Type 5 to Type 5. Some Type 5s are really strongly boundaried when it comes to their time, because they feel like that's a really important resource to them, and so they're hoarding their time. In other ways, it can be money, but it can also be their attention for things. And so what exactly Type 5s hoard is different from each individual. But the idea is that they're clinging to something in order to protect them against impoverishment. One way that this predominantly shows up with Type 5s is a hoarding of emotion. And that's a strange idea to think about. How do you hoard an emotion? But type 5s will very rarely, if at all, express any kind of emotion. And this can be for multiple different reasons. Type 5s kind of, in some sense, feel that if they are emotional, then it can be very costly energetically for them to be emotional. But also in some ways, it invites relationship. If you're expressing emotions, it means other people kind of want to connect with you and empathize with you. But that can be too invasive and too much. So they're very careful about when they share emotions and who they share it with to make sure that that kind of invasion is not going to happen. The other reason can be that type 5s actually have a really difficult time connecting with their emotions. It's not that they don't feel emotions, but it's just that they don't really have a strong way to tell the difference between feeling and thinking about an emotion. Many type 5s will give the impression that they're feeling something, but you'll kind of notice that they just start talking about the emotion in a very logical, detached way. And that's not feeling. And so it can actually be difficult for type 5s to feel something and just really sit in that without then needing to try to explain it or rationalize it in some way. The defense mechanism for type 5 is called isolation. And this is a habit of withdrawing, whether physically or into one's mind, to avoid being drained and feeling empty. Many 5s are known for isolating themselves physically, and so they might be the first person to leave the party or be someone that is impossible to get in contact with because they've kind of cut themselves off from people. My teacher talks about a 5 that she knew who had taped up his mailbox and ripped out his doorbell and unplugged his answering machine, all to make sure that nobody would contact him. And so type 5s can kind of be notorious for being hermits, for isolating themselves in ways so that they don't have to have contact with the outside world. They don't have to have people draining their resources. But type 5s are often miscast as introverts. And that's not always the case. Not all 5s are introverts. They can be very social people. But the trick here is that they're isolating in the sense that their minds are isolated. They're withdrawing into their minds and kind of compartmentalizing parts of themselves. And so you might be socializing with a 5 and really engage with them, but you're only kind of seeing a slice of them because they've portioned off the other parts and hidden them away. And so in the sense of a social encounter, you're only getting a little bit of this person. If they were to show up in the full sense of themselves and kind of share more with you, that then might feel like it's too much. Might feel like then you're going to kind of take too much away and they'll be depleted. And so this habit of isolating is something that 5s really need to watch out for because it's all stemming from this belief that they're going to be drained. But in actual fact, if they're engaging with other people, they might find that engagement quite nourishing and rewarding. But if they're not giving it a chance by isolating, then they're not really going to learn. The growth path for type 5s involves them being able to let go of this need to cling to resources and instead recognizing the inherent abundance in life. Type 5s are obviously fearing being depleted, and so they're going to try to hoard what they have and make sure that other people aren't taking it. But what they're disconnected from is the notion that there is an abundance in life. Even though they might feel like they're in an ice age where there's not a lot to go around, ice ages are typically followed by a period of flourishing abundance when the ice starts to melt. And so type 5s kind of start to learn how to recognize that there is a lot to go around and that people aren't necessarily going to deplete them. They might in fact be a source of nourishment and replenishment. And this notion is really captured in the idea of non-attachment, which is their virtue. And this is kind of a piece of Buddhist philosophy. The notion within Buddhism is that there is no you or I, there is no sense of self, this kind of non-dual awareness. And so therefore, this idea that you have things and you own things that are yours is strange because where is the you that they belong to? Where is this sense of me or myself or I? And so therefore, instead, it's a recognition that instead of being like a jar of water that's separated from the ocean, you are a drop in the ocean. You're interconnected with the ocean itself. And so then how could you be disconnected from resources? How could you not have enough, or how could there not be enough to go around? When type 5s are able to start doing work on themselves, they begin to show up more like healthy 8s in the sense they become a lot more powerful and fearless and really show up in the world. They take all of the knowledge that they've learned and all the ideas they have and actually sharing them and expressing them, often with the intention of helping other people and doing good. They also have a bit more confidence to set their boundaries more clearly with people. And they become more decisive in the sense that 5s can very easily get caught up in thinking and constantly ruminating about a decision that they're going to make. And they also have a habit of thinking about decisions they have made and thinking about how they could have done things differently or better, which can be analysis paralysis, a real trap for 5s. Whereas when they begin to grow, they kind of take on the more 8-ish characteristic of just kind of shooting from the seat of their pants. They operate from their gut instinct and get connected with their body rather than trying to make decisions using their head. For those of you who have type 5s in your life and are looking to better engage with them, here's a couple of tips that I would offer. Firstly, it can be really beneficial if you pay close attention to type 5's boundaries and making sure that you don't push them or cross them. So type 5s, as we've mentioned, are kind of very wary of people depleting them, and so they set up very strong boundaries to make sure that other people aren't going to do that. But that's not to say that type 5s don't want to help other people and aren't generous. But you need to kind of let them set the rules for that kind of thing. One example I've heard a lot of 5s talk about is the work environment and how it can be really difficult when people place unexpected deadlines on them. So if you rock up to their desk and say, hey, I need this in half an hour, that can send 5s into a panic because they haven't had time to prepare, they haven't had time to research it and really think things through. And these are things that are critically important for type 5s. So important because they actually want to do a good job. They want to give you a well thought out, a well digested piece of information. But if you expect it in half an hour, it's not really possible. And so they might end up being quite passive aggressive or stubborn and not doing it. Or they might end up giving you a sloppy result and then resent you for forcing them to do it in such a short amount of time. Or even just not do it at all. The other thing I would mention is to be very mindful of what you're expecting from type 5s in terms of emotions. And this is particularly important in romantic relationships. Somehow type 5s end up with a lot of heart types, particularly type 2s. Type 2s seem to want a lot of emotion and sharing from type 5s and want to fill their needs, and type 5s want boundaries and people to not do that, which is quite a strange dynamic. But in these dynamics, people can expect a lot of emotion from 5s. They want them to share how they're feeling about things. And as we've discussed, that's quite difficult because they might not be connected with their emotions, they might not know how they feel about it, and it's even a bigger deal to actually share that feeling. And so some types and some people engaging with 5s can expect them to be really emotional. And this can also involve certain circumstances where, because type 5s feel very calm and rational and grounded, it can feel like it's really easy to share your problems with them because they're not getting swept away by them. But if you're expecting that back in return, you're mistaken, because type 5s aren't really going to do that with you. And when they do share their emotions with you, really value that. Really notice that it's something that's quite precious for them to actually share something that's so intimate and something they've held so close. Type 5s are actually really sensitive people underneath, even if they might not seem like that from the outside. And so be very wary of the kind of emotional exchanges you're expecting from 5s, and don't ask for too much because you're probably going to end up disappointed. That brings us to the end of our video for type 5. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure to leave us a like, and you can also subscribe to our channel so you'll get updates on the new Enneagram videos from us. If you are a type 5, I'd love to hear about your experience, so please drop a comment below. And if you're not a type 5 but you have questions or other things to add, you can also leave a comment. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.